Okay. Yeah. Yes, yes. Okay. Good. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Please take your seats. We're about to start our next session. So for the next session, it is a great honor to introduce Ivan Damgaard from Aarhus University. Sorry. Okay, so as I was saying, Ivan is a professor in computer science at Aarhus University and a fellow of IISc. He does research in cryptography and related algorithms and mathematics. He's the author of more than 20 peer-reviewed publications, and he's a co-founder of the spin-off companies Cryptomatic and Partisia. And maybe even this is not enough, right? you are one of the fathers of first of all this event. The first CP/MPC was held in August, but he's also the father of this wonderful community, being one of the very first implementations and writing many influential papers on MPC. So really, it is a great honor to introduce Ivan. And Ivan is going to talk about adaptively secure asynchronous YOSO MPC a la Palier. And this is joint work with Simon Kamp, Julian Loss, and Jesper.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for the kind introduction. And thanks for the invitation to present here. This is some recent work. Now we are back in the more theory side of things, I guess. Feasibility result, although with an eye towards things becoming a little bit more practical, which you'll see later on what that means exactly. So let's look at the overview of what we've been doing, the setting first. So we'll be doing things on an asynchronous network. There'll be M parties, thinking of M being large. That's the main scenario where this makes sense. We're going to assume almost a third corruption, so 1/3 minus any constant C times M adaptive corruptions and malicious corruptions. What I also forgot to say here is that the asynchronous network has authenticated channels, but we don't assume any secret channels. And then, so we're going to do 3 kinds of protocols here. One for total order broadcast, TOB, one for YOSO role assignment, and one for so-called YOSO MPC. I'll get back to what YOSO means exactly. So, first of all, total order broadcast is basically just a digital bulletin board. And the security guarantee is everybody can write on the bulletin board, and there will always be agreement on who wrote what and in which order the things were written. And then, so the whole thing here is based on a certain circular variant of security of the Palier crypto system. So the ambition here was to say, instead of earlier work which tends to sort of do one thing or the other while assuming the first thing as a primitive, I'm going to try to build the whole thing from scratch simply. The COB is going to need, for a large enough message to broadcast, L-bit message, a total of order LM bits to broadcast. And this is kind of the best you can hope for, because if you would just send the same message to everyone without any guarantee for consistency, that would also require L times M bits. It's the first such construction, as far as we know at least, that does this asynchronously and with that kind of efficiency, without using heavy tools like threshold FHE, for instance, this was done for the first time by Blom et al. In TCC 20, while using twice all efforts, and even doing that in a non-black box way. Okay, then for the other stuff, so YOSO here is a framework that was introduced by Gentry et al. Back in 21. And the idea here is that we're going to try to save on computation for a large number of parties by not having all the work done by everyone, but having only a small committee doing stuff at any one time. And then there will be a sequence of these committees where each committee only needs to speak once, and the only secret state you need to maintain is going to be a secret sharing of the master secret key, the secret palier key in this case. So that's the overall idea. And then to make this happen, you need something called role assignment. And that thing is a protocol for forming anonymous committees. Okay, so we need to somehow select random parties to form a committee without anybody finding out without anybody except for the committee members finding out who they are. And there'll be n members in each committee, and think of n here as being much, much smaller than m. And from these two things, we can get this, what we believe at least is the first adaptively secure and asynchronous, in particular, YOSO MPC. And the complexity you get, basically, I guess the most important thing is the amortized communication cost of a secure multiplication, which is going to be m, there's an order missing there, order m poly n. So it's linear in the total number of parties and polynomial in the committee size. And asymptotically, this makes sense because n is actually going to be the statistical security parameter, right? Which you choose once and for all. So it means you can grow the number of parties as much as you like. N would still be the same thing. The committee size would be the same. So the m is much more significant asymptotically than the poly n is. Okay, so that's basically the overview of what we'll be doing. I will not talk very much about the total order broadcast. First of all, because I know very little about total order broadcast. My co-authors are the experts, and also because this is TP MPC after all, so I'm going to concentrate about the other thing. So the first tool, of course, is palier encryption and the later generalization by myself and Masjurek. So there, the public key is the RSA modulus. The message space can be numbers modulo n to the s, where s is some natural number you can choose as you like. It can be 17 or 5 or whatever you want. Ciphertext space will be set n to the s plus 1 star. And randomness space comes from set n star. And the encryption is that formula you see there. You don't have to learn this formula by heart at all. The only thing you need to notice here is the fact that the message appears in the exponent. Because that's the case, when you multiply two encryptions together, say encryptions of m and m prime, you will of course get an encryption of the sum of the two messages, modulo n to the s in this case. So it's additively homomorphic, and that's the main point here. Okay, decryption. This is CPA secure under something called the DCRA assumption, but we will need something stronger than this. I'll get back to that. So decryption, yeah. So you have a decryption exponent just like you have for RSA. It's chosen in this way here. And the important point is if you raise a ciphertext to the dth power, you will get n plus 1 to the m, basically. And now it looks like you have a discrete log problem to solve to find m. And you do, but it turns out that particular discrete log problem is easy. So from this, you can easily compute m, it turns out. So again, you don't have to worry too much about why that's the case. You can just take my word for that. Okay, and then because you decrypt by raising to an exponent, you get distributed decryption quite easily, right? In the simplest case, let's say we write D as a sum of n summands and give one additive share to each of n parties, then each party can just take the ciphertext to decrypt, raise to its own share, and by multiplying together, we get, of course, C to the D, which is enough to get the message. It's important to say that this is actually secret sharing over the integers. I mean, I really mean the integer sum of the D's, of DJs there, and not modulo something. And that's because we're working here in an unknown order group, right? You can only compute the order if you know the factorization. And so if you want a secret share, you can't really reduce modulo anything. You have to do this over the integers. That means that these shares, the DJs, need to be much larger than D for this to be secure. So basically, each share needs to have security parameter more bits than the secret has. But if you do that, then your secret sharing scheme is going to be statistically secure. This is, of course, for full threshold, but there are general threshold secret sharing schemes you can use here, and they work much the same way. Like if you can share with some threshold, and this means if you have enough shares, there is some integer linear combination that you can take which will give you the secret. So yeah, therefore, distributed decryption is pretty much the same thing. Everybody takes the ciphertext, waits to their share, and publish this. Okay? So I thought I was going to, before diving into all this YOSO stuff, there are some ideas in the paper that I thought might make sense outside of the YOSO context as well. So I thought I'd talk about those first. So maybe there's something to take home for other people as well. So first, I want to talk about private information retrieval. So this is something that's well known. Of course, it's an ancient two-party primitive. You have a client and a server. The server has a database DB, and the client has a secret index I. And what the client wants to do is to retrieve the ith item from the database without the server finding out which item was retrieved. And of course, the naive solution is the server will just send the entire database to the client, and he will figure out what he wants. But we want something better than this, of course, with smaller communication. So it turns out we can do this based on this generalized Polier encryption. So the high-level idea is C is going to send to the server an encryption of the index he wants in a certain format. This will allow the server to compute an encryption of the database item that is in question. He'll send the encryption back, and the client will be able to decrypt. And the idea is you can do this efficiently by exploiting the structure of these encryptions. Okay, so I'm going to assume for simplicity that the database's item is going to be a number modulo n. Okay, and here's the way and of course the setting is both server and client know the public Polier key, and C has and only C has the secret key. Okay, so this is what the client does. He writes down his index in binary form, so you get bits I1 up to IT, and I1 is going to be the most significant bit, importantly. And the client is going to send to the server the following encryption, so bit by bit encryption, E1 of I1, E2 of I2. So remember, E2 means encryption where the plaintext space is numbers modulo n squared. So the encryptions get bigger and bigger here, but there's a good reason for this, as you'll see. All right, so now here's an old trick that's way before our paper. So if you have two numbers x0 and x1, and you have an encrypted bit, B, then you can easily compute an encryption of xb. The way you do this is you multiply x1 into the encryption of b. You use the additive property to get an encryption of 1 minus b. You multiply x0 into that. If you do the math, you'll see that gives you encryption of xb. Yeah, okay. So using that observation, the server can now do its job. So here's the idea. So the server splits its database into the first half and the second half. So each of these green things is going to be an array containing a bunch of numbers modulo n. Okay. Now it takes the first encryption of the first bit. And notice that this first bit, the most significant bit, tells you whether the item the client wants is in the first half or in the second half of the database, right? So now what the server is going to do is it's going to use that encryption and the trick from the slide before to compute an encryption of the first half or the second half of the database. So you get something like this. So what you're going to do is you're going to, can I point? I guess I can. So you can, maybe not really. Oh, it's not very visible. Anyway, so you're going to do this trick sort of on corresponding pairs of first half and second half, and proceed horizontally, so to speak. And then you get an encryption of the first or the second half. The server doesn't know whether it has an encryption of the second half or the first half, of course, but this is what you get. And now this, of course, here is going to be numbers modulo n squared, because they're encryptions. And we're going to consider this as our new database, which we split in two, first half and second half. Now we take the encryption of the next bit, which tells you are you in the first half or the second half as before. And because this encryption is with plaintext space n squared, then this fits together, so you can do this. And you see where this is going, of course. You end up with a single encryption that contains the right thing. And so you get this kind of onion-shaped encryption that you can send back to C, and he can decrypt and get what he wants. So this gives you, therefore, a logarithmic overhead 2 matches peer. It's really passively secure based on CPA security. And the answer from the server is this layered poly encryption of the items you want. And this is not the most efficient peer protocol out there, but it has one thing going for it, namely that it means that the client's part is going to be really well suited for implementation in MPC based on palier. There's tons of papers talking about how you do MPC based on palier encryption. So now if you want to implement the client's part in MPC, the fact that what you get back is a palier encryption, of course, fits nicely together. Okay. Good. So, yeah, so what I want to say here also is that we'll need this for something called random index peer. So we'll have a bunch of parties. Some of them might be corrupt, of course. And we'll want them to choose a random index and retrieve a secretly randomly chosen item from the database into their MPC. So that means we will also need a way to create random encrypted bits, obviously, to do this, right? So here's the setting for this. We have n parties. We all have the public key. Secret key is secret shared among these parties now. We assume this now. And so it's well known from, I guess, back to the paper by Ronald Kramer, myself, and Jesper Nielsen, that if you have this setting, you can do secure multiplication on ciphertexts. So more precisely, if you have encryptions of numbers A and B, you can securely get an encryption of A times B. Right, and we're going to exploit this. So an easy solution, which doesn't quite work, is that we could have each party provide an encryption of a 0, 1, or plus minus 1 value. Right? Prove that you know what you contributed, do secure multiplications to get an encryption of the product here, which will, of course, be a random plus minus 1 value. That's fine. But what we will need, it turns out, is what we call a straight line simulatable coin flip, meaning that the situation will be as follows. There will be a simulator that has a certain output, a certain plus minus 1 value that it wants the coin flip to result in. And it needs to simulate the coin flip protocol in such a way that that is the result that it computes. Okay, for technical reasons. It's the kind of thing you run into whenever you want to implement the coin flip functionality. This is the problem you're always faced with then. And the problem here is that this doesn't quite work here, right? Because the simulator might, for a rushing adversary, the simulator might not know what the corrupt players will contribute before it has to commit to its own contributions from the honest players. So we need a solution for this. So what you can do is the following. Let's say we have a random oracle age that produces random numbers modulo n to the s plus 1. Let's say we can assign a unique label to each coin flip that we want to execute. Then we send the label to the random oracle. It provides us a random number. Now, Pali has this nice property that any number is an encryption of something. So that means the output you get from the random oracle can be thought of as an encryption of some random x. That's what it's going to be, in fact. Yeah, you might hit something which is not relatively primed to n, but there's almost. So the oracle chooses implicitly for us a random x. And what we are going to do is we're going to aim for a coin flip where the Jacobi symbol of this x is the output. Okay, what's the Jacobi symbol? So you don't have to, it has a long story in number theory, but basically it's just a multiplicative homomorphism that sends x to plus 1 or minus 1. This is what it is. So it is a plus minus 1 value. That's nice. And if I give you x and n, you can compute that Jacobi symbol efficiently. That's also important to know. Okay? So the idea is that now the random oracle has chosen x for us implicitly. And now we want to compute from this an encryption of the Jacobi symbol of that x. If we can do that, then we're done, right? Because by programming the random oracle, I can now make it choose whatever x I want it to. Good. So Yeah, and I'm going to assume just for the purpose of this that that's once and for all we chose some public W, public constant that has the Jacobi symbol -1. Good. So here's the idea. PI is going to choose a random ±1 value and some UI such that the Jacobi symbol of UI is BI. And this you can do by choosing UI to be 1 or W, because the Jacobi symbol of 1 is always 1. Okay. So you're going to broadcast the encryption of BI and of UI. And this is very easy to prove correct by just an OR construction, because there's a Sigma protocol for this where you prove that I encrypted either 1, 1 or -1W. So just to say that's easy to get actually secure. And now we do secure multiplications to get, on these pairs, to get an encryption of some U, which is the product of all the UIs. And also an encryption of the product of all the ±1 values. And because the Jacobi symbol is a multiplicative homomorphism, that thing is going to be the Jacobi symbol of U. Because I multiply together the Jacobi symbols of all the UIs. So that's what you get. And now we remember we have this ES of X that the random oracle chose. We now have this ES of U. We multiply these together, decrypt, and get X times U. Right? Which we decrypt, and now everybody locally can compute that Jacobi symbol of X times U. I should mention that UI is actually not random. So UX doesn't actually mask X, but the point is that the Jacobi symbol of U is random. So therefore, it hides the Jacobi symbol of X, and that's all we care about, it turns out. So detail. And then finally, you take the public constant that we just computed, multiplies into the encryption we have, you do the math, you end up with an encryption of the Jacobi symbol of X. So that was supposed to be the goal. Okay. This uses, once again, the multiplicative property of the Jacobi symbol. So if you didn't follow all of this in detail, don't worry about it. It doesn't really matter much for the rest of the talk. I just thought it was kind of cute, so I wanted to show it to you. Okay, so conclusion is, we can make random encrypted bits in the random oracle model. We can get straight line simulatable coin flips out of this. So simply can hit the value at once by programming the random oracle, and that's what we care about. Okay, so now we're finally ready to the thing that's really used in the bigger protocol, which is multi-party random index peer. Okay, so now the setting is that we have n parties, we have a party secret key shared among them, and we have some public database. And we want to get an encryption of the ith item in the database for some random I, without leaking I, of course. And what we know we can do is we can make these random encrypted bits of the right form. And now, of course, every party can locally just emulate the service part of the computation, right? That doesn't even require communication now. And you'll get this onion layered encryption of the actual database item we want. So now it might seem that we're almost done, right? Because we have E1 of DBI sitting there in the middle. That's what we wanted. So why don't we just peel off all the layers there? That doesn't work. It's not going to be secure. The reason for this is that I could do this. That will leak information on I. The problem is that the server's part, which we all did just now, is deterministic. So it means that this encryption inside there is not going to be a random encryption. It's going to depend on I. For a single honest client, that doesn't matter. He knows the database and knows I anyway. But here we can't afford to leak this because we have n parties and some might be corrupt. So we're going to have to randomize inside the encryptions before we decrypt. Yeah. So here's part of the process. Say I have an encryption of some X. And I'm worried that I don't want to decrypt this directly because seeing this inside ET minus 1 of X might leak information. So suppose we could make the following ciphertext R, which is an encryption of Y, where that Y itself is an encryption of 0 and a random encryption of 0. If we could make that, then we'd be done. And that's because we could then do a secure multiplication protocol on C and R, and we'd get an encryption of the encryption of X times Y. And because Y is an encryption of 0, that's going to be a random encryption of X inside there, right? So now we can securely decrypt that one layer. Okay. So the only question is, how do we get such random encryptions of 0? Well, it's the usual thing. All parties can make an object of this form, and we combine them to get a random one. And there's in the paper, there's a Sigma protocol for proving that your ciphertext is of this form there. So that part is kind of standard. Okay, so this means all you really have to remember now of all this technical nonsense here is that we can do this random multi-party index peer. Multi-party random index peer. Okay, good. So now back to the YOSO setting. This is where we started. Okay, so we have M parties for some very large M. We assume almost a third corruptions for some, 1/3 minus CM corruptions for some constant C. And rather than having all parties do the work, we're going to try to save by having a small committee do most of the work at least. And so you think, well, wouldn't an adaptive adversary just go and corrupt the committee? Because the committee is much smaller. You have a corruption budget of much more than N, right? So the solution to that is a three-part answer. So you want to keep the identity of the committee members secret, first of all. Must be secret. Of course, when once one of these guys says something, the adversary will know, he's on the committee, I'm going to corrupt him. But if you make sure that before you say something, you erase your secret state, then that corruption will not be of any value. So that's what you can do. You design the protocol so a committee only speaks once. And then, of course, you want a sequence of secret committees. So each committee advances the computation by one step, so to speak, says something, and sort of makes sure that the next committee learns enough to take over from the first committee. Okay. So that's the idea. And you also will pallier. We'll do this with a setup assumption, which we will need. So we're given the public key N. There'll be some initial set of committees that are chosen in the setup to get off the ground, and the secret key will be secret shared for the first committee. So we have the secret key available in secret shared form there for the first committee. Okay. So then the idea is that it's known, of course, again, we can do MPC inside pallier encryptions if we can decrypt securely. So as long as we can have, and of course, a committee, if it knows the sharing of the secret key, it can help us decrypt. We'll keep the state of the computation in a public set of ciphertexts. And whenever the MPC needs a decryption, the current committee will do this. At the same time, it's going to reshare the secret key for the next committee. Okay. So to make all this happen, we need, first of all, this total order broadcast thing, because we have to keep track of the public state of the ciphertexts. And we can do this with this TOB. Okay. And then we need role assignment, because we did say in the setup we have some bunch of committees defined from the start, but we'll run out of them at some point, so we have to generate new ones. So that's done with role assignment. And then we need some method for letting a committee send secret stuff to the next anonymous committee. This is not obvious how to do this, right? I said the committee does its work, secret reshares the secret key for the next committee. But how do you do that if you don't know who they are? So that's a problem we have to solve. So it turns out, that's a detail. I get back to what that means, never mind. So role assignment. So here's how we start the process. So we're going to let each party publish on broadcast a bunch of stuff. So there will be the first guy there, he makes an encryption of a tag, a random tag he chooses himself locally, and then encryption of some data. I'll get back to what the data are. So a bunch of stuff like this, and we'll think of this here as being our database for the peer. We can do random index peer, right? Remember, we can do this. So when we do the first random index peer, what comes out is one of these database items. So you have something of this form there. So encryption of a tag and encryption of some data. But remember, what this thing also does is it randomizes the encryptions. So although, of course, that top thing there is an encryption of one of the tags that was chosen on the other side, there's no apparent connection you can make from this side to that side. So we've chosen some party anonymously to be the first committee member, you could say. And then what we do is we decrypt that tag there. So then then the ith guy can realize, aha, that's my tag, so I'm the first committee member. Okay. And we do this more times, etc., etc. So, you know, we'll just do it a whole bunch of times here, so we have material, so to speak, for a whole bunch of committees here. We make a random choice, so we might choose the same guy several times. That's going to be apparent because the tags are going to repeat, so we just throw those out. Okay, so yeah, you form committees from this outputs there, and we now have not only the tags, but we have these encrypted data pieces from each committee member. Okay, that's going to be important now because now we have to do this thing about the communication between committees. So this data item from PI is actually going to be one-time pad key material, it turns out. So what the ith party is going to do is going to choose a random one-time pad, encrypt that on the palier, and send this into the peer, so to speak. Okay. Actually, we need several encrypted one-time pads, but never mind. Just think of one for now. And suppose that we know, because we're going to have a plan. We're going to have a plan saying the first committee has to send stuff to the next committee. So that means we know a bunch of pairs of parties. This guy needs to talk to this guy at some point. So if we know that PI needs to send to PJ later on, then we have a public encryption of a one-time pad from one guy, and also a public encryption of a one-time pad from the other guy. Because we don't know who they are, but we have encryptions, right? So then what we're going to do is to multiply the encryptions together, decrypt, to get the sum of the two one-time pads. And now PJ can locally subtract his thing, so he gets one-time pad I. So now these two guys share a one-time pad. And that means that yeah, so PI, if PI is the sender of something at some point, he knows, aha, I share a one-time pad key with some guy out there. So I can send to him by doing one-time pad encryption, publish the ciphertext, and the other guy will be able to decrypt. Yeah, okay, I should not. Okay, so just to finish that story, of course, one-time pad encryption, it has very limited bandwidth. We can only communicate so much data from these one-time pads that we have, but we're only going to need this to do resharing of the secret key. So it's a very limited amount of data we have to send. So this is going to be fine. Yeah, and the technical note here is we actually want adaptive security. So what PI is going to do is he's going to keep his tag on the one-time pads, but he's going to forget about the randomness used for the encryptions, because this way we can later on, if you do the simulation, we can always lie about the tag on the one-time pad. We can choose those as we like. And the adversary won't know the difference because he doesn't know the randomness for the encryptions. It's the idea. That's a technical note. If you haven't seen simulators like this before, this might not make sense to you, but never mind, because that's not really important, right now at least. Okay, so here's resharing then, and also a problem that we have with resharing. So here's the sending committee. They have shares to the secret key D, and we want him to send stuff to receiving committee such that they end up with sharings of the secret key. The receiving committee has the same size as the sending committee. I just need graphically more space. So here's the first party. He needs to receive a bunch of stuff. Second party needs to receive a bunch of stuff, etc. So what the first guy in the sending committee, who knows S1 is going to do, is he's going to do a secret sharing of his share, and send shares to the first party, the second party, etc. And this will then happen using this one-time pad encryption stuff I was talking about before. Second guy does the same thing, etc., etc. And so the first party has received a bunch of stuff here. In reality, of course, we don't have passive security, so he might not receive something from everyone. But as long as he gets enough stuff, it's going to be fine. So he's going to do a linear combination of what he gets and get some shares prime 1 out of this. Everybody does this. And so you end up with a secret sharing that's guaranteed to be a sharing of the same D that we started from. So that's good, except it's not so good because, like I told you, for integer secret sharing, the shares must be bigger than the secret. There's no way around this. So these S1 to Sn, they already had to be bigger than D. But now we secret share S1, that now becomes a secret. So these shares over there, they need to be even bigger than before. So if we keep going like this, then the share size is going to grow indefinitely, which in fact was what happened in all previous protocols using this paradigm. So that's annoying. So here's the solution for this. So notation, let's say that S and random square brackets is the set of shares of S computed from randomness rand. So rand in reality is going to be a vector of integers, but I just think of a single value. That's going to be fine for now, actually. So we have 3 committees: a sending committee, a receiving committee, and now also an auxiliary committee that helps us do the transfer. And what the auxiliary committee is going to do is they're going to choose a random value and some randomness and send those shares to the sending committee by doing the same sort of resharing approach that I had on the slide before. So now these guys up there, the sending committee, they will have both shares of D and R and shares of R. They'll have shares of D and shares of R. Computed with randomness, R and S. Okay. And these guys will always, at the same time, they will also send shares of the same value R with different randomness as prime to the receiving committee. Okay. And now, because the sending guys, they have both shares of D and R, they can subtract the shares of R from the shares of D. And broadcast all those shares. So now anyone can reconstruct D minus R, which is fine because if you choose R big enough, this will not reveal any information about D. And so from the point of view of the receiving guys, D minus R is now a publicly known constant. So if you add that constant to all of our shares of R, then of course you're going to get the shares of D, because it's all linear, right? So these receiving guys, they can adjust the shares they have of R into shares of D by adding this public constant there. Okay, so that's fine. Why I just made everything more complicated than before. Did this help? Actually, it does help, I claim. And here's the reason why. So the point is, first of all, S has to be much larger here than the R over there. And that's because if we do that, then when we broadcast these shares, they just look like random shares of D minus R. There's no site information on D leaked by doing this. So we really only learn D minus R. And R just needs to be larger than D, right? Because it's used to mask D. That's the only demand in R. And then that means that the S prime here, that just needs to be sufficiently larger than R so you get a secure secret sharing of R. Okay, and now you see it turns out that the size of the received shares only depend on D and the security parameter, and not on a number of times we reshared. So that's how we get rid of this share growth problem. Okay, good. So I want to finish off with some remarks on some high-level remarks on how we handle various things with the asynchronous network and malicious security and so on. So, like I said, we assume we have pretty much like a third malicious corruptions, adaptive corruptions, but we also have, so to get malicious security, we just basically always add zero-knowledge proofs. It turns out we have Sigma protocols for all cases here, so we just use a random oracle to get non-interactive zero-knowledge proofs, and in this way you really only have to speak once when you say something. And it's going to be apparent to everyone whether what I send is correct or not, so we can just filter out all the incorrect contributions. So we're on an asynchronous network. You have to remember that when you want M parties to say something, but you have T corruptions, you can only ever wait for M minus T parties to say something. Because if you wait for more, you might be waiting forever, because those T parties you didn't hear from might be parties that are corrupt and never send anything. So this is what you have to do. So you remember when I had all parties post this database thing for the role assignment, it's not really the case that everybody gets to say something. It's only N minus T parties. But because we have a third corruptions, among those that say something, we have honest majority. So that means that if we select a random committee from these guys, we can, with very large probability, assume that each committee will have honest majority. That's Janov bound or something like this. Yeah. So this is fine, and because if we have honest majority committees, things are going to work. We can wait for at least a majority of a committee to post correct contributions, even asynchronously. And it turns out that's always going to be enough to proceed. When we hear decryption shares, let's say, from an honest majority, from a majority of the committee, that's going to be enough to decrypt. Okay. Adaptive, yeah, okay. So there's a number of tricks we do to do adaptive security. Like I mentioned, this thing doing one-time pad encryption becomes non-committing because the adversary doesn't have any evidence of which one-time pad is the correct one. So once the simulator finds out what should be sent here when somebody gets corrupted, we can just say, oh, that was the one-time pad, so here's the message. And there is something, a classic trick from Tal Weben and friends, which is called a single inconsistent player technique that we use to show decryption is adaptively secure. That's a long story, which I won't bore you with. Yeah, okay, and here's the final caveat. So we have to secret share the secret player key, right? But when we communicate shares, they are protected by one-time pads. The one-time pads were protected under palier. See, so this becomes circular, right? That you know, we protect the secret palier key under itself, so to speak. So we have to assume that palier is CPA, even if that's the case. So that's the one caveat, which I think we'll not be able to get rid of, because so I guess the overall goal here was to make black box use of palier here, and not start doing you know, computing the palier key generation inside MPC or something like this. So I think some kind of circularity will result if you make the palier key survive the entire protocol. Okay, so a final remark on this interplay between total order broadcast and MPC. So we need the total order broadcast and MPC to keep track of the state, the public state of the computation, which ciphertext do we have. But it turns out also that the total order broadcast needs a few unpredictable coin flips to work efficiently. It's something that's in the nature of efficient broadcast that if you want it to finish at least expectedly fast, you need a random beacon to make choices for you. And we can do this in MPC, so we'll arrange it such that the committee gets a robust secret sharing of a random value. And when it's time to flip the coin, you just send shares to all the parties. The point is, a robust secret sharing is something where, as long as the dealer is honest, then when parties send shares, you can always get the right value, even if some parties send incorrect shares. So that means that when you flip the coin, the committee who has the value will just, everybody says send shares to everyone. This is not a broadcast, just send to everyone. Because everyone is going to get enough correct stuff to be able to reconstruct the value. And that's important to break the circularity. I mean, it might seem that, you know, we need setup, we need TOB in MPC, but the thing also needs something from us, so why is that not circular? It's not circular because when we flip the coin for the TOB, we don't use the TOB itself. So that means we can set up a whole bunch of coin flips inside MPC in parallel, just use them as we go in the TOB. Okay, good. So I'm at the conclusion here. So we get this asynchronously adaptively secure TOB, role assignment, and MPC. First construction without using all the heavy guns, and there's this amortized communication cost of preparing a committee is basically m log m squared times poly n, and the amortized cost of a secure multiplication is this same thing but without the log factor there. Yeah, and I think that was it. So thank you.
Thank you for a wonderful talk. Any questions?
Thank you for the talk. Why is it not optimal resilience? Because I'm here. So.
Okay.
So why is it not optimal resilience? Because as I understand, for decryption, you'd also post a proof of decryption, correct decryption, right?
Yeah. That is true. So that it will not be a problem for the decryption, but the problem is the choice of committees. That we want that when you choose a random committee out of the total universe, we want that committee has honest majority with large probability. And that's not going to be guaranteed unless you start from a population where more than the majority is honest. That surplus is required.
Oh, so basically the probability that the committee has an honest majority is too small if it's optimal resilience.
Yes.
Okay.
It would have to be essentially, the committees would have to be essentially as big as the total population, which we don't want, right?
Mm-hmm.
We want small committees.
Thank you.
More questions?
So,
hello.
Hi, Professor. Thank you for the great talk. I was just wondering, so we tried to implement failure encryptions in practice. They are just so expensive to run computationally, very expensive. So I was thinking if there were any alternatives for the properties that you consider for this work in a computationally cheaper form of cryptography.
Sure. Yeah. Palier is definitely not the most efficient system in the world, but it has this very nice algebraic properties. And the problem is that, there are several caveats here. One is the computational concrete efficiency, and the other one, of course, is the setup assumption. Can you get rid of this? The problem is that the only way I know how to do this random index peer reasonably efficiently is with Palier. If you try to do class group encryption, which you can, you would get rid of the setup assumption, but then the random index peer is going to be terrible because there is no sort of native support in class group encryption for Palier for peer. And whether we can do something. So the problem is, of course, additively homomorphic public key encryption is not something that happens all over the place, right? It's hard to do. And if you would go to let's say, lattice-based encryption, you can even do multiplications, but then there are other things that get much less efficient, right?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the class group encryption possibility even here.
Yeah, yes.
So you already partly answered that. So the other thing is the property you're using that's present in Palier but not in class group is the dense ciphertext property that every ciphertext is basically decryptable, right? So that's one question. The other question is, I think one of the thing you said that you are using zero knowledge proof for the correct formatting of the plain text, right?
Yeah.
Because you have honest supermajority, can't you replace some zero knowledge proof by, let's say, signature like quorum certificate, like multi-signature T+1? Sometimes you can use them, replace it by zero knowledge, like to increase efficiency.
Yeah, I'm not. So the last thing first, I'm not sure that would be compatible with the committee's approach, and you only speak once. I'm not exactly sure I see that happening in this case.
I see.
Also because, by the way, yeah, I do have honest supermajority among the population, but I only have majority among the committees.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
So and the other stuff, yeah. So class groups, I don't see how to make that work efficiently, or at least not as efficiently as here, because of there's no good peer for that setting. The dense ciphertext, I think, is not so important after all, but the other thing is more serious.
Okay, all right.
Yes, we have a question here.
Yeah.
So thanks, Ivan, for the talk. I wanted to ask, what is the complexity of the setup that you need in this protocol?
The I'm not sure.
Like you have some setup, right?
I do have setup, yes. So I assume
Or
that the Palier public key is given to everyone. I assume that there's a committee chosen initially. They know who they are, nobody else knows, and they have the sharing of the secret key. And then I need a small number of additional committees. I basically need enough of those so I can get the first random index peer going. So the first batch of role assignment. It's only a constant number of committees, actually, because you can do all these random index peer, all this stuff in parallel, actually. So I think, sorry, I need a logarithmic number of committees in M.
Okay. And the
It does
okay.
go closer.
The follow-up question is, if I would have a stronger setup, would I need all these random PIR things somehow? Because if you set up enough committees, then you can already talk to the future committees, right? If you give them private keys and so on.
Sure. I mean, I think first of all, there's been previous work where you handed public and secret key pairs to committee members. This makes the role assignment more complicated because you're going to have to generate those key pairs inside the MPC, which is kind of annoying. I mean, of course, you can always assume enough committees so we can keep going for a while, you know, and maybe that's enough. But then it's a little bit. I mean, you run out at some point, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So I think you have already done it without the heavy guns like threshold FHE, but you do have honest majority both in the overall population as well as inside the committees. Is there any information theoretic or symmetry key based protocol already, or do you see any hope?
We were contemplating at some point that maybe we could do this whole stuff based only on symmetric key primitives. We got stuck, so I don't know what the answer is. I should say perhaps something I forgot to say, this is for the whole audience maybe, that of course there is recent work on information theoretic secure protocols in the asynchronous setting, where you also get linear overhead for multiplications. Of course, the big difference there is that for information theoretic secret sharing based protocols, you have a very big secret state, right? I mean, the secret state is always the entire thing, right? Sometimes very big, whereas here of course, it's much smaller. So on the other hand, the computational complexity of secret sharing is smaller than we have, so it's incomparable things.
Okay, we have to wrap up. Please address any additional questions to Ivan during the break. And let's thank Ivan again. And Ivan, I'm supposed to hand it over for you.
So we have to pose.
Am I audible also at the back? I guess so. I can hear, yeah. So welcome to the next set of contributor talk session. So the first talk is about concretely efficient asynchronous MPC from lightweight cryptography. It is by Akhil Bandarupalli, and he's a PhD student at Purdue University. And I'm sorry if I did not pronounce your name.
That's correct. It's perfect. Okay, can you hear me, everybody? Yeah. I think, oops, they are changing here, but hey, the slides are not visible. I think this, you have to screen share or what? So these slides are on Google Slides, so they're not on PowerPoint. Okay, yeah, that worked. Okay, I'll start my timer. Hi everyone. My name is Akhil. Today I'll be presenting our work, computationally efficient asynchronous MPC with linear communication and low additive overhead. So this is joint work with Xiaoyu and Yifan from Tsinghua, Aniket and myself from Purdue, Aniket also from Supra, and Chenda from HSLU and Web3. Chenda is also in the audience today. So briefly going over the setting, we are considering an MPC framework with n parties. They are connected with pairwise channels. We consider guaranteed output delivery here as a correctness property, and of course a privacy property standard. We consider asynchronous MPC. The adversary model is honest versus malicious. The adversary can arbitrarily control malicious faults, and the communication network is asynchronous. There is no time bound on message delivery, and the adversary schedules messages between honest parties. So briefly going over the performance setting, we consider arithmetic circuit with addition and multiplication gates. There are overall C gates across D layers in the circuit, where C is the circuit size and D is the circuit depth. We analyze the performance basically by looking at the communication cost first. So we decompose this term into two terms. First is the circuit-dependent term with that depends on the circuit size and the circuit depth, and the additive overhead, which just depends on the total number of parties in the system. And while measuring, we also measure the computation costs. We measure the number of operations that are performed by parties, and we segregate them based on their relative expense. Field element operations first, symmetric key operations next, and public key operations last. Like there is a 1000x factor difference between field element operations and public key cryptographic operations. And we consider our setting to be under a scalability factor of n greater than 100. We try to run the protocol at like over 100 parties. So we'll briefly go over the landscape of current asynchronous MPC protocols. There are protocols that offer unconditional security. They are secure against computationally unbounded adversary. Of course, they assume secure channels. And these protocols are generally built using tools in coding theory, such as Reed-Solomon codes, Schwartz-Zippel-Lemma, and so on. They are give information theoretic guarantees. And computation in these protocols is generally not an issue. They only utilize field element operations, mostly addition and multiplication and that kind of stuff. They typically cost around only nanoseconds of time. But coming to the communication costs, a recent work actually achieved an optimal circuit term n times C plus n squared times D, but it has a high additive overhead of n to the power 5 field elements. But also a point to note is that this work only considers is under n is equal to 40 plus 1 resilience. A recent work actually achieved the same complexity in the circuit dependent term, but the additive overhead increases to n to the power 14. Like that is, you see, these terms are these protocols are not close to practice because of the high additive overhead terms. If you try to deploy them over tens of parties, you can directly see the communication explode to terabytes, right? So these protocols are typically impractical because of high communication costs. Whereas if you look at the other end of the spectrum, like protocols that offer computational security, they are only secure against a computationally bounded adversary. They use assumptions like discrete log hardness assumption, and bilinear pairings. Require setups like public key infrastructure, power of tau, and DKG with varying levels of difficulty to set up that system. Set up these setups. The advantage with these form of cryptography in general is that the transcripts, they offer some form of homomorphism along with secrecy. They keep the inputs secret, whereas they offer some form of homomorphism. Here, additive homomorphism mostly. Bilinear pairings also offer multiplicative homomorphism. The communication, the advantage with this is that you can utilize the homomorphism to reduce that additive overhead to cubic, typically. Like there are these set of works that only have cubic additive overhead in communication, but the problem becomes the computation. Each operation at least costs 100 microseconds. That is like the cheapest operation. If you go to something like Palier or bilinear pairings, it goes up to milliseconds. So, and these set of works at least require n times c such cryptographic operations, because of which the scalability becomes a problem. Like if you see at n is equal to 50 and take a circuit with 10,000 such gates, the computation itself takes more than 100 seconds. So yeah, we just state that all these protocols also do not scale beyond n greater than 50 because of their highly expensive computation complexity. So we consider a space in between these two extremes where we call we use the term lightweight cryptography. This term was first coined by a recent paper in a journal of cryptology by Shoup and Smart. So what do we mean by lightweight cryptography? Like symmetric key operations, pseudo-random functions, and hash functions, hash computations. So these are the typical set of tools. The advantage is they are highly computationally efficient, 100 to 1,000 times faster than heavyweight cryptographic operations. So if you take the amount of time, for example, you just see like there is a 100x difference between a standard hash computation and like the cheapest public key cryptographic operation. If you want to go into hardware acceleration realm, it also increases to 1,000x difference. So the computational efficiency is a huge advantage we have in this setting. And also the set of tools that we can use with these operations, there is like we can build cryptographic commitments from these tools. We can do this, we can employ private and verifiable information dispersal. We can disperse information within the system privately. There's also this new construction in Shoup and Smart 24 called distributed zero knowledge proofs, which essentially allow the dealer to prove that the shares form degree T polynomial, also only with lightweight cryptography. What we do not have is homomorphic transcripts. So there is no form of homomorphism that can be expected from these kind of cryptographic tools, which typically results in increased communication because we cannot restrict an adversary at the source. The adversary can typically do a little more, can act in more bad faith when there is no homomorphic transcripts. But yeah, we show how to deal with these qualms in this work. And a cherry on top is that post-quantum security comes for free with lightweight cryptography. So yeah, we can utilize the quantum random oracle model and employ a history-free reduction technique directly to this model to guarantee post-quantum security. I'll briefly present a motivational result in terms of why lightweight cryptography indeed is a very attractive path for practicality in MPC. So we consider this application on distributed random beacons where a protocol continuously emits random numbers. We compare two protocols. This is our prior work, hashrand versus SPERT. So if you look at the computation of these two protocols, hashrand has n square log n hash computations versus n square discrete log exponentiations, whereas it has an order and factor higher communication. Okay, hashrand, but even with these costs, hashrand still has 5x the throughput. Like it gives an order factor improved throughput as compared to the discrete log exponentiation based protocol, even with an order and factor higher communication. So the takeaway we propose is that even with a small increased communication cost, computational efficiency that is offered by lightweight cryptography typically gives us an order of magnitude improvement in performance, even at scale, at n greater than 100 parties. The asterisk is provided the communication increase is not huge. So what we saw previously was an order and factor increase in communication was fine. But yeah, if it's order n square or n cube, the communication might become the bottleneck again. So under this motivation, we present the results of our work. Our work is computationally efficient. It only uses lightweight cryptographic operations. It achieves amortized linear communication in the circuit size. It has a low additive overhead. It only has like n to the power 4 field elements of additive overhead, an order and factor higher than, what discrete log, what public key cryptography based MPC achieved, and it is post-quantum secure. in the quantum random oracle model. Okay, so yeah, I'll present the design of our protocol. Typically, asynchronous MPC in this space, addition and multiplication gates. Input phase, we use Shamir secret sharing scheme to encode the secret in a polynomial and disperse shares of that secret. We evaluate addition gates locally by summing them up, like taking a linear combination. This is pretty cheap. But for multiplication gates, we have to use BO triples, where parties must have T sharings of A, B, and AB, where A and B are uniformly random elements. So under this design, typically prior conventional designs require an asynchronous complete secret sharing protocol. So this protocol dictates that every party must have a secret share of every honest party's secret. Like every party must have a share of every secret. ACSS is very expensive, as it's like a series of works that I've demonstrated before. In the lightweight cryptography setting, ACSS incurs a quadratic communication cost when the dealer is malicious. And this is again the result in SS24. The thing to take is, without transcript homomorphism, achieving linear ACSS is hard. Like there is a set of prior works that I can refer you to in case you're interested. Linear ACSS is hard without transcript homomorphism. So we take a completely different route. We propose a primitive called ACSS with identifiable abort. So what this essentially does is, every party either outputs a valid share, it either has a valid share, or it has like a verifiable proof of dealer cheating. Okay, you can think of it as this, like compared to ACSS, every party has to have a share. Here, every party either has to have a share or have a proof that the dealer is cheating. So that proof can be verified. It needs to be verifiable, and it can be built using just lightweight cryptography. You have to utilize commitments to do it. Like we have to force the dealer to commit to generate and broadcast commitments to even invalid shares, so that when the honest party comes forward with the shares, you can just verify these shares with the commitments that the dealer generated and just prove that the dealer is malicious, like produce a verifiable proof. It is a little more complicated than that, but just take my word for it. Yeah, and next, yeah. We utilize the ACSS with identifiable abort phase to conduct this sub-circuit evaluation, where we divide the circuit into n smaller parts. Okay, and at the end of each sub-circuit, we have like a Byzantine agreement instance, where parties either agree on the correct reconstruction result for that sub-circuit, or they agree on a malicious dealer, saying the evaluation for this sub-circuit failed because of this malicious dealer. We utilize the proof technique that we proposed before to basically force honest parties to either output the correct output or agree on a malicious dealer. So evaluate each sub-circuit. Either the evaluation is successful if everybody is honest, or everybody agrees on a malicious dealer. Okay, so this is the sub-circuit evaluation part. So what happens if the output of the sub-circuit is a malicious dealer, right? Like say, what happens if a malicious dealer is like, yeah, fine, I am ready to be convicted here. Okay, so we propose this new idea where we reconstruct the secrets that were proposed by him using a primitive called asynchronous verifiable secret sharing. This is different than asynchronous complete secret sharing in a way that if AVSS only focuses on the reconstructability of secrets rather than the share delivery itself. Like the focus is not on every party getting the share, but the focus is more on if the secret that was proposed by the dealer can be reconstructed or not. So AVSS turns out is not as hard as ACSS. It can be built with linear cost, just with lightweight cryptography. But what we added here in this work is an efficient public reconstruction protocol that requires only linear communication to construct a secret. So this was linear AVSS was there before, but the reconstruction cost was always quadratic. In this work, we proposed an efficient public reconstruction technique with linear communication. How do we do it? We enhance the batch reconstruction technique from DN07. And we add zero-knowledge proofs and commitments and other stuff that can refer to the paper for more details on this. Yeah, so once a malicious dealer is detected, we reconstruct his secrets. We don't try to interpolate shares. We reconstruct his secrets. And we trigger this party elimination framework where we first reconstruct the inputs of a malicious dealer. We replace so we take each wire of the sub-circuit and we replace the contributions of that corrupted party. We replace them by the reconstructed secret itself instead of trying to interpolate shares to everybody. And we eliminate this malicious dealer and we reevaluate the sub-circuit. So instead of trying to interpolate shares, we just reconstruct the secrets, kick that faulty party out, and reevaluate the sub-circuit. Since there are only at most linear number of faulty parties, there are overall at most linear number of executions of sub-circuits. So this will give us linear evaluation cost eventually. So yeah, from like 30,000 feet, what we did so far, instead of trying to recover shares of faulty dealers, which was quadratic because of ACSS in lightweight cryptography setting, we first compiled proofs of cryptographic proofs proving malicious behavior. We agreed on the dealer being faulty. We publicly and efficiently reconstruct this dealer's secrets. We eliminate the dealer from the system, and we rerun the protocol by replacing the dealer's shares with its secrets. So each and every step indicated by a green tick mark here has linear cost. So eventually, the overall evaluation also is going to have linear cost. So this is the picture so far about how we tackled the quadratic ACSS problem in lightweight cryptography. So the second part of our design is generating beaver triples. So this is we so far shifted that into the pre-processing phase. Talking about it now, yeah, beaver triples are the standard. So we utilize the DN technique in this work. Here, essentially, we first prepare the random sharings, A and B, using ACSS with identifiable abort. We prepare random double sharings with essentially the same value needs to be shared with degree T and degree 2T. And we have to reconstruct AB plus R using the 2T sharings and output the T sharing, AB plus R minus R of T. So we utilize this technique, but that we see a few problems in here, especially when we consider the lightweight cryptography setting. 2T sharings are hard in general. Like 2T sharings in asynchrony is even more hard because you have to ensure you have to deliver a share to every honest party, which is the reconstruction cost and the delivery cost typically are quadratic. But we build upon a prior work here to get this cost down to linear. I'll skip over all the major details. Here, in this work, we propose like a dispute control framework where we define roles called kings that generate and verify triples. So essentially, parties, they use ACSS ID and SH2T, which is like a 2T sharing protocol. And there exists a set of kings that control the triple generation here. And they generate triples using the DN technique. Everybody reconstructs, each king is responsible for generating a set of triples. And they conduct triple verification and fault localization. So either the triple verification is successful or there exists a faulty party because of which the triple verification failed. You agree on 2T plus 1 successful kings. So yeah, I'll skip all these details. They might be a little too dense. So the main part to remember is, say triple generation failed because of a party, right? So what we do instead is instead of trying to prove that this party is faulty by using a cryptographic proof, we just mark a dispute saying, yeah, I dispute with this party and I'm not going to accept messages from this party anymore. And we prove that a party is faulty by waiting for T plus 1 disputes. At least T plus 1 disputes implies at least one honest party has a dispute with a given, with the disputed party. And based on this optimization, we achieve like quadratic improvement over prior work. So yeah, I'll just skip over this part. King identifies, yeah, that's the dispute control framework. Yeah, and we use T+1 disputes to prove a party is faulty and trigger party elimination. And we reconstruct views only to the kings who blame parties and mark disputes, each of which gives us an order linear factor improvement over prior work. You can just verify, check the draft online for more details about this. So related work, there's also a prior paper that just got uploaded to ePrint in October that also proposed an asynchronous MPC protocol with lightweight cryptography. So this field is getting pretty hot. This has like quadratic cost, but with quadratic cost when linear number of parties are faulty, it has like an order n power 6 additive overhead compared to n power 4 for ours. Yeah, essentially the summary. What we saw so far, we achieved MPC with computational efficiency. We are preventing communication blow-up using 2 new techniques: party elimination for linear amortized communication, dispute control for low additive overhead. And we are also implementing and evaluating a weaker version of this protocol, which will come out soon. We'll try to demonstrate these results and the scalability at an n greater than 100 setting in practice soon. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Akhil, for the cool talk.
Yeah.
I actually want to start with a question because
Sure.
Because somehow I've never seen identifiability in the context of asynchronous, because asynchronous has this problem that you can't identify, like you can't distinguish between a corrupt person and a slow person. So I was a bit curious about how you are able to identify that the dealer is faulty if he was honest but completely cut off.
That's a good question. So here we only focus on purely malicious behavior, like something like, say, you have a degree T polynomial that you're supposed to share. You instead shared like some random garbage.
Okay.
So in that case, we try to identify that corrupt dealer and convict him. If for a slow-moving party, like you said, there is no proof. Like as long as n-t parties behave honestly, our protocol terminates.
So it's okay if in those segments, like some segment was headed by an honest person, but that did not go through. You're not depending on that. Okay.
No, we only depend on n-t parties. If the party behaves faultily, we are kicking him out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Are there any questions? Yes. Ivan?
In connection with Divya's question, what if an honest guy finds out that something was wrong? He has a proof that the dealer was faulty, but he's now cut off. It's slow. So nobody finds out that he had a problem. Is that something that how do you deal with that?
That's a very good question. Actually, okay, I'll just go back to our sub-circuit evaluation part. Yeah, so in this case, there is like a BA protocol at the end of it, where all the set of parties either have to correctly reconstruct it, which is the case when like everybody agrees on that reconstruction output result. If they are not able to do it because of a faulty dealer, that BA is eventually going to output that proof, like that honest party's share is going to be forced to be delivered to every other party. Does that make sense? Okay, thanks.
Thank you. There was another question here. Questions here.
So your 2T sharing protocol,
yeah,
is it also bit identifiable about?
No. So our 2T sharing, okay, that's a good question. So here we simplified, I simplified things a little. It is 2T sharing of 0. It's like we use a 2T sharing of 0 rather than 2T sharing of both values. It is not with identifiable abort. So so in the triple verification and localization part, if the 2T sharing was indeed invalid, then that triple verification will fail with a very high probability. So we do not rely on providing stronger guarantees for 2T sharing, but we instead rely on the triple verification part to see if the triples generated were correct or not.
The improvement is really from n power 5 to n power 4, right?
From n power 6 to n power 4. Yeah, no. You mean the additive overhead or the?
Yes.
Yeah. Additive overhead, we are coming down from n power 6 to n power 4.
Okay, so my question is actually n power 4. So where does it occur? Within the BSS or ACSS?
It's a good question. Our ACSS is cubic first. It is linear cost, but the additive overhead is cubic. We can get it down to n square log n and try to improve that part. But the main cost that occurs is from dispute control, actually.
Oh,
we have to,
got it.
each phase is
Yes.
linear, and we have to run it at least n times. Yeah, that is part is in power 4.
Are there any more questions? Okay, if not, let's thank the speaker again and move to the next talk. Okay, while the speaker is setting up, maybe I can introduce. So this talk is about high throughput secure MPC with an honest majority in various network settings. And the speaker is Christopher Hart Kitsero, and he's a PhD student at Technical University of Munich. And once he's ready, and this is a combined work with Ajit, Yuquin, Hussein, and Murli. Yeah, the stage is yours.
All right, thank you. This talk is about high throughput secure multi-party computation with an honest majority in various network settings. So first of all, let's go through honest majority real quick. So in this talk, we focus on tailor-made honest majority settings for the 3PC and 4PC settings. And basically in these settings, you can have very efficient protocols for semi-honest security in the 3PC setting and malicious security in the 4PC setting. In the 4-party setting, you use an additional party for replication, and then you can verify secret shares easily. And that field was pretty much started, so tailor-making protocols for a specific number of parties by ShareMind around 15 years ago, where they proposed the first kind of very efficient 3PC protocol in the honest majority setting. And that's what you can see on the top left. And then on the top right, about 5 years later, the replicated 3PC protocol basically reduced the number of elements communicated, but they pretty much use similar intuitions. So you can express a product of A and B as a set of 9 terms, and 6 of them are cross terms, meaning they cannot be computed by an individual party. So you need some communication. By the way, that equal sign in the second line should be a plus sign. Then it makes sense. So basically the ShareMind protocol was first exchanging individual shares, doing resharing, exchanging individual shares, and then every party can compute 3 of these 9 cross terms. And the replicated secret sharing scheme first locally computed 3 cross terms and then reshared and exchanged them. And pretty much still the state of the art is you need 3 elements of communication per gate. And we basically want to tackle 3 challenges that exist in practice with honest majority protocols that do actually not stem from just optimizing the raw number of elements communicated, but that stem from other issues. And the first challenge is that network heterogeneity is ubiquitous. So if we look back, we see that all these, both these protocols have a kind of symmetric or homogeneous layout, meaning that each link is equalized, is used equally both for latency critical communication and for bandwidth critical communication. But when we actually set up servers in a cloud setting, then we get quite different network links between in these different settings. So we have a LAN setting where servers are co-located, MAN setting, so metropolitan, same metropolitan area, then CMAN, where we use different cloud servers for each different cloud service providers for each server, then WAN1, where we use servers in the same country, or even run two in different countries and continents. And then we also have a mixed setting, because you might also have deployment scenarios where some servers are located in the same country and another server is in a different continent. And what you can see is that actually the link properties differ significantly. So in some cases you have up to 600% differences between the links. And if you have a homogeneous protocol where all parties communicate equally, you basically suffer from the worst possible link. And we basically raised the question, okay, can we actually design honest majority protocols that prioritize links that are well connected and deprioritize links that are not well connected? And then the second challenge is computational complexity matters. So most works focus on communication complexity and basically say, okay, this is where in practice the main challenge lies. But especially if we look at dot products that in the honest majority setting can be computed in cubic computational complexity, but quadratic communication complexity, any sufficiently large dot product will be computationally bound and not communication bound. And we can see this if we evaluate, so for 3PC we use replicated secret sharing, for 4PC we use Fantastic 4, and we basically compare multiplications and scalar products of the same output size. So if only the communication complexity mattered, all these lines should overlap. But as we can see, if we go beyond 100 megabits, the dot products don't really improve anymore in throughput or in runtime. And so basically this chart shows that for some applications also computational complexity matters, and we raise the question, if you look at computational complexity, can you maybe also optimize protocols in this domain? And the third challenge is achieving high throughput with open source implementations. Pretty much when you have in our case, we have a 25 gigabits connection. And when you have a 3PC protocol, you would assume that where each party communicates 1 bit per gate, that you achieve a throughput of 25 billion gates a second. But as we can see, all these different frameworks achieve only a throughput of a couple million gates per second or even less. So we frequently achieve less than 1% network saturation. And for clarification, so of course Motion and MPYC use some stricter settings. So MPYC uses n-party protocols and Motion uses dishonest majority. But ABY3 and MPSpeeds use replicated 3PC in these settings, and we turn on all framework-related optimizations and multi-threading and so on. And still, basically, we are kept at these numbers, and we measure both internal and external runtime. So external runtime would be when you count, when you measure the whole binary, not only what the framework does in terms of internal measurements. So the third question we raise is, can MPC implementations saturate fast connections? And basically, the protocols we designed to tackle these challenges are called Trio and Quad. Trio for semi-honest 3PC, Quad for malicious 4PC. And as you can see, the communication patterns, so these dashed links are constant communication interactions, and bold links are linear communication. We can actually achieve a quite heterogeneous setups where most of the links are not needed, and some other links are only needed in constant time. And that is without increasing the best known communication complexity. And in this case, for example, if you see on the, so for both protocols, we just need 2 links that are well connected in terms of bandwidth, and 1 link that is well connected in terms of latency. And all the other links can have arbitrarily bad connection, and it doesn't hurt the protocol's performance. Now let's quickly introduce the intuition about these protocols. So if you're familiar with the Astra protocol, these kind of notations are probably quite familiar, but otherwise I just try to explain the gist of it. So in our case, P0 only has input independent shares, so just correlated randomness, which is in our case lambda A1, lambda A2, or lambda B1, lambda B2 if you have 2 shares A and B. And then the other parties hold both input-dependent and input-independent shares. And then the intuition that we use is not that parties locally compute sub-sharings and then reconstruct them, but instead we say each party has a different role. And basically the role that P2 has is that it computes this term MA1 times MB1, which if you multiply it out, it's basically AB, so that's the term we're interested in, plus, and then comes basically an input-dependent error, which is A lambda B1 plus B lambda A1, and then an input-independent error. So that would be lambda A1 times lambda B1. And now P1 has the role of correcting this input-dependent error with local computation, and P0 has the role of correcting the input-independent error with local computation. And basically this intuition we summarize as oblivious error correction. So you have one party computing the term we are interested in with an input-dependent and an input-independent error. We have one party responsible for correcting the input-dependent error at expense of a larger input-independent error. And finally, the pre-processing party is responsible for correcting the input-independent error. And then at the bottom you can see the final messages, so we just need to mask them with as RNGs, so shared pseudo-random number generators, and then we have masked messages that we can use such that all parties receive their correct output shares. Now we use the same 3PC protocol as a basis for our 4PC protocol, which also provides malicious security, and we use this additional party P3 only to verify, basically to have some kind of replication, so that for each term that we can compute, it can be somehow verified by two parties, so that if one party is malicious and sends a message, there's some kind of protocol that the other three parties can run, and with the help of a second party arrive at the same message, then compare this message, and for this you can use hashes at the end of your protocol, so just exchanging a single hash for all your messages, and then verify the computation. And the main intuition is we use our 3PC protocol, so P0 does some computation to correct this input-independent error, then P1 and P2 obtain the final share in the online phase, and then actually this communication from P0 is very easily verifiable by P3 because of the replication, but the challenge is how do you verify the communication between P1 and P2. And here we utilize that P0 also gets an input-dependent share, and then with this input-dependent share, P0 can compute the sum of P1's and P2's messages, and then compare the after subtracting the local computation with the sum, compare that term with P3, and you have another replication of that message, and the receiving party P2 can check if they are equal. And an interesting property of the communication layout is that P3 doesn't need to communicate with other parties at all. So P3 just computes these verifications, and at the end of the protocol just needs to submit a single hash, basically, for all the combined verifications. And if we go back to the communication layout, so all these constant round communications in the online phase, they are also related to verification, because verification doesn't have a circular dependency, so you only pay for your communication, for your latency overhead once. And so for P3 you could pick any party in the world pretty much without hurting your protocol performance, because it doesn't. It only needs to communicate a single message at the very end of the protocol. Okay, so then if we compare this to related work, so the most similar work to our protocols are Astra and Tetrad. And in 3PC you can see we don't have substantial improvements, because actually in Astra you can do a quite straightforward improvement to the computational complexity, but in 4PC we both reduce the number of links required, so we can achieve a higher tolerance against weak bandwidth links and weak latency links, and we also reduce the computational complexity by 2 to 3x, As you can see, the computational complexity of 4PC schemes, because of the additional computations required, is actually not trivial. It's almost 100 operations in these existing schemes compared to one plaintext operation. And then also you need to compute these hashes for verification at the very end of the protocol. And also you need to compute sRNGs to mask your messages. So we do have significant computational overhead, especially in 4PC. Then finally, the third challenge of throughput in open source implementation we tackle by presenting a new open source framework. And we focus on a lightweight design with hardware acceleration techniques. And Neha already previously introduced bit slicing, so where you decompose Boolean inputs into individual bits, and then you group these bits together in a larger register. And for instance, what most frameworks nowadays don't do is when you have a bunch of Boolean computations, they just evaluate a single Boolean instruction costing you one cycle. But if you pack these bits appropriately in 256 registers, or some CPUs even support 512 bits, then you can actually use one instruction for these 256 or 512 parallel operations on one core, and then you can scale this to multiple cores. And we can see even for 4PC, where we need all these hash-based computations, where we need pre-processing, verification, and so on, the end-to-end throughput that you can achieve is between, so we implement different 4PC protocols in the framework, so between 15 and a little bit more than 20 billion gates a second, and that's very close to the theoretically possible throughput of 25 billion gates per second. And also, we would like to highlight the difference in improvements you can achieve with different techniques. So from these protocol-related improvements, we maybe get 2x or 3x here and there, but then with some hardware-related optimizations or system-related optimizations, we can actually get much larger improvements, so suggesting that there is still a lot of room for improvements when it comes to system-related optimizations. Okay, and then basically we can use a few further tweaks. So when you have a 25 gigabits network, you have and you have duplex links, so each party can communicate 25 gigabits in each direction. Then you can also, when you evaluate a circuit multiple times, you can do it in permutations. So you would assign different, so you would choose one party assignment for one evaluation and then a different party assignment for a second evaluation, and you can pretty much do all possible permutation and then arrive at a protocol that uses all network links symmetrically. So it's always easier to start from a heterogeneous protocol and then make it homogeneous again and use all your links than the other way around. But basically we implement a couple of 3PC and 4PC protocols in the framework, and we can achieve between 30 to 90 billion gates a second. So 90 billion would be if you only count the online phase. But even if you have pre-processing and online phase, remember that in 3PC and 4PC they are quite cheap. You can get to 60 or 70 billion gates a second, and then we're not even that far off from a TTP implementation using the same hardware acceleration techniques, so around one order of magnitudes. Of course, assuming an ideal network with 25 gigabits bandwidth. And also what you can do in 3PC or in honest majority in general, so in dishonest majority, when you increase the number of parties, your performance decreases, but in honest majority, the opposite is the case, because any additional party just gives you an additional link to utilize. So whenever you have, so that's this 4PC setting with a star, because when you have a 3PC protocol, you can just introduce another fourth party and then use an additional link basically and scale pretty much better from there. Then also, what does it mean for some real-world applications? So apart from just computing raw gates, so we also measure AES performance. and there we get to a few million blocks a second, and that's around 100, a little bit less than 100 megabytes of data you can encrypt each second. So if you have, if you don't use an SSD, but let's say in hard drive, you wouldn't even be restricted in terms of throughput from your reading speed in terms of shared decryption. And then the trusted third-party implementation, that's our own, I think, with official AES implementations. You could probably beat that 17 million blocks per second throughput. Okay, then we talked about the first two challenges. So settings where our protocol-related contributions where they actually make a difference. And that's all the time when you have some kind of setup where some parties are not well connected. So in the first chart, you can see the AES runtime when restricting latency between 5 out of 6 of all links. And because we need only one link that is well connected in terms of latency, actually these 5 links don't matter at all. And as you can see, if you only restrict these 5 links, you can see in the bottom that there's no impact on our 3PC and 4PC protocols because we don't need these links anyways. And then the same is true for throughput. So for throughput, we don't require basically 2/3 of all links are not required in terms of bandwidth critical communication. So as you can see, as we adjust the bandwidth between the parties, our 4PC protocol that is optimized for the settings, only uses 2 bandwidth-related links, doesn't suffer in terms of performance. And then last thing, computational complexity. So we compute large vector dot products, and again, this includes the whole end-to-end runtime. So hashes you need to compute as RNGs and local computation and pre-processing and online phase. As you can see, you can get around 2 to 3x improvements directly proportional to the 2 to 3x improvements that we get when reducing the number of operations per gate. And there's also the TTP comparison, again, using the same hardware acceleration techniques. And there are, just a little bit better than the MPC results, again, assuming these optimal network settings. And again, for AES, so that's another, so just in different network settings, because we look at different network settings, compared to these two 3PC and 4PC schemes that have completely homogeneous layouts, we can get in different settings improvements because naturally we just have well-connected parties and not so well-connected parties. So basically in summary, we said the first challenge is that network heterogeneity in practice is ubiquitous. You have high differences in link connectivity between parties. So to tackle that challenge, we propose 2 new protocols, one 3PC and one 4PC protocol, and that match the communication complexity of state-of-the-art protocols, but they are more resilient to a high number of weak network links, so the protocol doesn't, the protocol performance doesn't suffer from weak network links between some parties. And we showed that this leads to up to 8 times higher improvements in throughput based on the measurements we did in cross cloud server settings. Then we said computational complexity matters, so especially in 4PC where the number of operations per gate is significant, and especially for dot products that are kept by computational complexity in almost majority of protocols, a reduction of 2 to 3 times per gate directly translates to a reduction in runtime. And finally, the last challenge for achieving high throughput with open source implementation, we propose a new open source implementation, and that implements our new protocols and several existing protocols. And we show that all of these protocols achieve a throughput of several billion gates per second. And we also have follow-up work for PPML and other applications where you can also get these kind of network saturation results in other applications apart from just measuring raw throughput for end gates or AES blocks. And finally, yeah, we would just like to propose that most implementations reveal their network saturation metrics, because when you look at network saturation, you can pretty much tell how much implementation-related improvements are still possible. When you achieve 1% network saturation, that's a strong indicator that you might have 2 orders of magnitude potential improvements from an ideal implementation, provided you're not communication round bound because you're implementing a function that is not bound by bandwidth. Okay, and that wraps up my talk. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you, Christopher. Are there any questions? I wanted, yes, there's a question.
Hi. So assuming somebody wanted to use your new framework for implementing some application, like you mentioned in the very end, so what's the programming interface like? And in particular, what someone who implements in that framework need to worry about it, all these underlying hardware optimizations, or are they kind of abstracted away?
Yeah, good question. So we use a C++ high-level interface where you basically you need to manually trigger communication rounds, because we don't use some kind of circuit representation that would involve additional overhead in terms of performance. But then you can use high-level operations, and whenever you use share conversion, then automatically the shares are converted from an arithmetic vectorization to a bit-sliced representation. So you don't need to worry about switching computation domains. The framework takes care of that. And we also have, I would say, quite extensive documentations with examples on how to implement an application.
Are there any other questions? So I wanted to ask something based on a comment you made that you said, for example, if we had more parties, like 5 parties or 6 parties, then you could still start with the same base 3 PC and then add these parties as, so it will only improve. So I wanted to ask, so that would mean that this base 3 PC is not using anything about there being a single corruption, right?
Oh, yeah, if you increase the number of parties, so let's say from 3 PC to 4 PC, then automatically you get a 4 PC protocol with at most 1 corruption. And then if you increase to NPC, you can only allow 1 corruption. Okay. So your security model gets weaker, but your performance gets higher because you can just utilize additional links.
I wanted to understand if it's like honest majority, meaning like you go to 5,2 and with whether the same thing will still happen.
Yeah, no, the corruption stays fixed.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, if not, let's thank the speaker, and there's going to be a break until 4:10.
Welcome back, everyone, to the last session for today, but not the last talk. So, our first speaker for today's session would be Andreas Bruggemann. I don't know if I pronounced it correctly. They're a PhD student from TU Darmstadt, and they'll be giving a talk on Don't Eject the Imposter. The stage is yours.
Hi, and thank you very much for the kind introduction, Varsha. So just leaves for me to say that this is joint work with Oliver, Thomas, Arshid, and Hossein before immediately jumping to some motivating example. So if we look at secure inference, consider a case where we have some credit card company and some credit scoring company who jointly want to set up some system for example, credit scoring or fraud detection. Now on the other side, we might have some online store, some customer places an order there, and now the online store wants to figure out, is this customer actually trustworthy? Will I see my money? Is this maybe fraud? So this online store places a query. From the other side, we jointly get some model, and then the online store should, as fast as possible when the order by the customer arrives, also get a prediction to decide whether to accept this order or not. So, of course, we want to preserve some privacy here. On the one side, the online store might want to keep private with whom it's conducting business, but also keep customer data private because of regulation. On the other side, the companies on the right-hand side don't want to leak the model, which basically is their business model. So what they can do is just employ some multi-party computation protocol for that. There's one problem, though, which is that on the left-hand side, we should kind of assume the online store to maybe act in a malicious way. Why is that? If this is a business model set up by the right-hand side, they might offer this as inference as a service to a lot of different online stores and other clients, and chances are high that they stumble upon one like malicious actor there, which is enough to steal their model. So looking at MPC, we could employ some protocol with semi-honest security, which clearly is not sufficient in this case, because we have to assume that a server provided by the online store might cheat in the computation. We can resolve this issue by doing something in the maliciously secure model, but this might be too inefficient because we kind of put some level of trust into the credit scoring company and the credit card company, so we don't expect them to try to cheat. What could we also do? Well, if we know that only the online store is not to be trusted, we could kick it out of the computation, completely outsource to the other two parties. But what happens then is we have two-party computation, we lose our honest majority, and so we also get quite bad efficiency. So instead, here we want to look at an asymmetric model where we have one party that is allowed to cheat, the other ones are not, in an honest majority setting. Like, it's important to note that this asymmetric trust models are definitely not restricted to secure inference. They are actually quite natural in the real world, because if you have computation among different entities, people, institutions, it's quite natural that there's a different level of trust you might put to different of these shareholders in a computation. And with these asymmetric things, there have been some prior works, especially like in two-party computation, already beginning with YOSO Garbled circuits, because if you look at it, it's kind of easy to plug in some maliciously secure OT as a sub-protocol here, and then you out of the box have security against a malicious evaluator, while it's much harder to also get security against a malicious garbler. Also for secure inference, this has been used by the line of work started with Muse, where you have a semi-honest server, and it's been kind of the opposite way around with a malicious server in this case. What we instead want to do in this work is we want to extend from 2 to 3 parties with one known malicious party, and then want to exploit that we now can have an honest majority. At this point, it's just important to clarify in this security model, we have an honest majority, meaning that we assume that an adversary is able to corrupt one of the parties. In this talk, if I talk about a cheater, it means if this party is corrupted by the adversary, then it can behave in an arbitrary malicious way. If the adversary decides to corrupt any of the other parties, it has to adhere to the protocol, and it's public information which of these 3 parties is the designated cheater. So the key takeaways from these presentations will be, first of all, think big. Why just compute on scalar values if we can immediately go for matrix multiplication? Second, don't eject the imposter. If we have an untrustworthy party, we shouldn't kick it out of our computation, but leave it if this gives us an honest majority. And third of all, embrace diversity between parties. Like I already said, it's quite natural to have asymmetric trust, and there exists a quite interesting world between the fully semi-honest and malicious setting, which are in itself first and foremost like symmetrically. So towards the first part of this protocol, let's look at some building blocks, and it's important to note this, for this moment here, is pretty generic for like a lot of similar protocols. So in MPC, of course, we primarily care about how we can multiply. So first we will look at some optimistic multiplication that could go wrong, and really famous at the moment is replicated secret sharing, where we share a value x into 3 additive shares x0, x1, and x2, which add up to x, and each of 3 parties has exactly 2 of these shares. If we now want to multiply 2 numbers a and b, first the parties pre-compute some random sharing of 0 that then later need to basically blind some of the values. And then for multiplication, a party pi computes a value ci, which is ai times bi, plus ai times bi minus 1, plus ai minus 1 times bi, plus its own sharing of 0. And this immediately is an additive sharing of the product, but because we are replicated, then each party sends its share to one of the other parties, and we are replicated again, concluding the multiplication. What's interesting, though, and has been used in some works, often also quite implicitly, is that if you look at this protocol, you can just switch out all scalar values by matrices, and it works exactly the same way. And of course, like normal scalar multiplication is a special case of this, dot product is a special case of this, and this just works nicely out of the box. And also, this generalization to matrix multiplication is not specific to replicated secret sharing. It works for a lot of other things, for example, additive sharings and beaver triples. I mean, there have been some works with beaver matrix triples, actually. Also, this masked secret sharing line of works, talking about ABY2, Astra, Swift, and so on. Like in all these protocols, kind of the same trick also applies there. So we have seen how to do this optimistic multiplication. Now the big problem is, in the malicious model, we kind of want to detect and prevent malicious parties from cheating. Here we looked at different verification methods. First of all, triple sacrificing. We want to consider the ring version here for optimizing local computation also. And triple sacrificing is the thing, we can see it here on the on the bottom left side, where, for example, we have a triple 7, 6 and its product 42. And if we want to verify that this triple really is correct, we sacrifice a second multiplication triple, proving correctness of the first one. And this is computationally not that expensive, but has linear communication overhead, this method. You could also use it in the binary domain, but there it would be smarter to use another method like, for example, cut and choose, which offers exactly the same trade-offs. And this is actually quite similar on the high level. Like, we have a triple, we sacrifice now not one, but some triples to actually verify this one triple, and we also, on the side, take some other triples, actually open them to review if they are correct. If we want to shift around our trade-off a bit, also there's a method like distributed zero-knowledge proofs, also called ZK FLIOPs, depending on which paper you look in. And they kind of turn this trade-off around, because now they have sublinear communication overhead for the verification, but are computationally really expensive if you work on rings, because then you need to use some extension rings for that, and there hasn't been, like, for a long time, some useful implementation. Now, like quite recently, there was a work specifically designed for rings, but that wasn't there at the time we looked into this paper, and this still needs to be figured out how nicely this works. And this distributed zero-knowledge proof, where basically each party proves that it does the correct thing, exploiting that its witness is also there in a secret shared form between the other 2 parties that jointly act as a verifier. So in detail, I will give you a short recap of triple sacrificing and how it works in our asymmetric setting. So we generate optimistically, so they could be incorrect, 2 multiplication triples. How exactly we do it completely depends on the kind of protocol we want to employ it to. So we have like a triple ABC, and want to verify that this is correct using a correlated triple A-B-C-, correlated because this value B still is the same one. And we do this by sampling some random value, R, then we compute a linear combination in the A and A' values. Using the value R, recover this V, compute a second linear combination, and in the end have to verify that the result is equal 0. When this passes, so if this result is 0, then we basically see that it kind of boils down to a cheating attempt to predicting correctly this random value R. And because we work on rings, we have to use a speeds to K trick, so we do the computation over a bit larger ring, and in the end, if this verification passes, now that except for negligible probability, our multiplication triple is correct. Now, if you look in this protocol, like generating this random value and also the final zero check can be nicely batched, and per multiplication triple, the amortized cost of that is 0. So this is not the problem. What is our bottleneck is generating triples in the beginning and also this recovery of V. In the beginning, there's not much we can do about, but in general, like in this protocol, what we can do in an asymmetric setting now is to completely outsource this verification to only the semi-honest servers. Because for generating multiplication triples, it's really useful to have an honest majority there because we're basically doing multiplication at this point. But later, all these steps really nicely work without an honest majority, so it saves us a lot of headache if we don't have a cheater in there at all. Another nice observation that was new in our work is we can again replace all scalar values by matrices, and we will later see that this brings us substantial improvements. We especially see we only need to generate the triples, and the only communication that doesn't amortize away is the recovering of this matrix V, so something linear in the size of the first input matrix to some matrix multiplication. So this is like a first takeaway here. Think big, compute on matrices, not scalar. This immediately generalizes to matrices, and if we would do it some other way, it would actually be substantially more expensive. This would be the point to clarify, because the prior part is quite general, what we exactly do in this work. So we looked at protocols where we do the expensive work and verification in some setup phase, which is function dependent, and for that, this line of work with masked secret sharing like ABY2, Astra, and Swift is well suited. So we base our work on that, proposing 2 new 3-party protocols, Auxiliator and Sozium. Now, let's have a look why we don't want to kick cheaters out of the computation. So our first protocol, Auxiliator, is exactly this case where now we say that 2 of the servers, the semi-honest ones, are running the majority of the computation, and the malicious party is a helper that only does things in pre-processing and completely, it might deliver some inputs and get outputs from the online phase, but doesn't have to do any computation there. And our protocol Auxiliator is really similar to the protocols Astra and ABY2, but the difference is Astra also has this helper, but it's assumed to be semi-honest. Here now we assume it to be malicious. ABY2 would be kind of the same, but entirely without this helper. But these protocols are really closely related to each other. And the thing is, if we now look at these protocols and compare Auxiliator with ABY2, so where we kick out the helper, we don't look at Astra because, of course, we now have to assume that the helper is malicious. If we look at ABY2, there we only have 2 parties, and originally the paper reported that a single AND gate costs us 134 bits of pre-processing. Online phase is only 2 bits, but this I will also not talk so much about because the online phase is the same between both protocols. In our work Flute, we figured out that if we just remove the IKNP style OT of ABY2 originally with silent OT, it goes down to 4 bits. And if we are in our setting and use for verification this in binary domain, it would be cut and choose. Cost again goes up to 11 bits, and only with distributed zero knowledge we can get it to 1 bit. But again, communication is nice, but computationally this is most likely horrible. So we see after all with silent OT, it doesn't even look that useful. But this is binary domain. Things start to get interesting if we go to arithmetic domain, because now with ABY2, like we have this security parameter and everything inside, and even if we plug in silent OT instead of IKNP style OT, we can bring down the cost a bit, but we still have kind of 2 times L, where L is the ring size, and these many ring elements. And in Auxiliator now, with sacrificing, we just have 4 ring elements. Admittedly, this ring is like 40 bits larger, but this still is much more efficient. With distributed zero knowledge, it even would be only 1 ring element. And it gets even better for us, or like worse for ABY2, if we now look in matrix multiplication, where things even get more interesting. So if we multiply a U times V matrix and a V times W matrix, so the result is a U times W matrix, what we can see here for ABY2, we have this factor UVW. This is naive matrix multiplication. It completely does the pre-processing for each single multiplication in this matrix multiplication on its own. In our protocol, this kind of overhead of like 4 ring elements just splits between the dimension of the first input matrix and the output matrix, which is substantial improvement here. Again, for distributed zero knowledge, we could even bring this further down. And if we want to apply this, we tried this on some convolutional neural network from mini-ONN for the Cypher10 dataset. We can also see this behavior that on the nonlinear layers, okay, there we have ABY2 like half a gigabyte. This goes down with silent OT to about 23 megabytes. Our cut and choose is even more expensive with 60 megabytes. We could maybe bring it down to 6.4 megabytes, but we see the linear layers. Suddenly, even our sacrificing approach takes like 10 megabytes, While for ABY2, even with silent OT, we have 60 gigabytes. And we also see on the right on the total cost, this completely dominates the cost of the overall protocol. But seeing this, you could also think about maybe in the nonlinear layers, we actually want to just not use the malicious helper because their ABY2 performs quite well. But this concludes like a second takeaway. Don't eject the imposter, even if we have this malicious cheater, even if we don't trust this person, especially in the arithmetic domain and definitely, especially for matrix multiplication, it's quite important to have this honest majority. So towards the third part, where we speak about a world between the semi-honest and malicious models. So far, I've only talked about one of the protocols. We will also soon come to the other protocol that we did here. So as our baseline, we used Astra, which again is in the fully semi-honest model, Swift, which is honest majority, but in the malicious model. And so our protocol Auxiliator is based on Astra, but just adds additional protection against the helper now turning malicious. Our second protocol, Socium, is based on Swift. And there we say that now one of the evaluators, in a fixed noun one, can cheat, the others not. And then we carefully look like we can optimize and remove some protections and so on. And intuitively, why these protocols are useful is Auxiliator. There we say, okay, the cheater does some of the work. In Socium, we let the cheater do more work. In our business setting, it would be like we have to do less and let our client do more. But we can also see intuitively, left to the right, the adversary gets stronger because first it can't cheat anywhere, then it can make the helper cheat, then it can make one of the other parties cheat, and then it might make an arbitrary party cheat. So we kind of have the spectrum in the security model. And what we can then see is per operation and the cost, this spectrum is exactly reflected. So Astra and Auxiliator share the same online phase. The same almost goes for Swift and Socium, so this is two respectively 3 ring elements. Now in the pre-processing, for single multiplication, Astra is 1 ring element. For the other ones, now we have to decide what verification we want to use. If we have sacrifice, it goes up to 4 ring elements, 5 ring elements, and 9 ring elements. Distributed zero knowledge, it even stays at an amortized 1 element, then goes 2 and 3. So we see the stronger the adversary gets here, the more expensive these protocols also become. If we do the matrix multiplication, as we saw before, we have kind of the same behavior, only that for the sacrifice case now, these factors of, for example, 5 are split between the size of the output matrix and the dimension of the first input matrix. Distributed zero knowledge just depends on the size of the output matrix. And using cut and choose in the binary domain, we also have the spectrum a bit different now, going from 1 bit, 11 bits, 12 bit, 21 bits, while for distributed zero knowledge, it follows even the exact same values just for L equals 1, as we had for the multiplication. So if we again use this for secure inference, we can also see the spectrum reflected here. This is the communication. To just quickly walk you through that, the solid parts in the bars on the bottom, this is the online phase. The dashed parts is the setup phase. And the blue part is linear layers, the orange is nonlinear. So we can see in most of the cases, nonlinear is our bottleneck here. We can see how it gradually the cost increases, the stronger the adversary gets. What I forgot to say, this is the sacrifice case. On binary domain, again, we use cut and choose. We see one exception here, though, in Swift, where suddenly the linear layer preprocessing goes up to 1 gigabyte, which is simply due to the reason how Swift does truncation inside this protocol, which doesn't really work nicely together with sacrifice, which also wasn't originally considered in the paper. So this is kind of an outlier in this case. But if we switch to distributed zero knowledge, we basically see the same spectrum, only know that, of course, the preprocessing gets much cheaper considering the communication because of the trade-off that we have here. We also did implementation of all 4 protocols, but only for the sacrificing proof in this case. But here we can also see the same spectrum. We can also see that even this huge communication overhead by Swift in the end isn't so bad after all. Also seeing that all these protocols are able to do the inference in 2 seconds online, and our setup goes up from 1 second, 11 seconds, 22 seconds, up to a bit under 34 seconds. And yeah, we make all of the implementations of these protocols openly available here, which concludes the final part of my presentation here. Again, telling, embrace diversity between parties. If you look at an asymmetric setting, you can really get some protocol exactly finding the sweet spot between the specific security setting that we need and also the efficiency there. So I'd like to thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to answer any questions.
questions, anyone?
Thank you for the talk. The malicious helper helps in the pre-processing, you said?
Yeah, it does.
Isn't that, and it doesn't in the online phase?
Well, let me say it kind of depends on the protocol here. We mostly spoke here about in the beginning our auxiliator. So there the helper it's basically equivalent to setting up multiplication triples, but in this function-dependent pre-processing paradigm. In Socium and respectively, like, because it's based on Swift, it's a bit different. Like, there the helper also does something in the online phase, but stays absent for most of it, and only in the final verification phase, then comes back online to do some of the work there.
Okay, so it's like not eliminating because it comes back to do some computation later on.
In Socium and Swift, yes. This was as per the design by Swift and Socium based on Swift, like we unfortunately couldn't avoid it. In Auxiliator, it really just is there in the pre-processing phase, so it acts as a dealer, but it could also provide some inputs and outsource the online phase if it wanted to.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, let's thank the speaker again. Thank you, Andreas. Okay, let me introduce the next speaker by the time they set up. So our second speaker is Tore Fredriksson, who is currently a researcher at Zama. And today they'll be talking about practical robust MPC for Galva-ring settings.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. So yeah, I'm Tore Fredriksson. I'm with Zama. And I'll be talking about practically robust MPC for Galois-rings, or the fellowship of the Galois-rings. Before diving into it, this is a joint work basically with everyone at Zama, the MPC team, and all of this. And the slides are actually not mine. Nigel prepared the slides. I will do my best to portray his lightweight and comedic and fun presentation skills. And the reason is this talk will also be given at real-world MPC in Sofia later this month. So sorry for the spoiler if you're also going there. Anyway, so just to get into it a bit. Okay, so basically last year we at Zama gave a presentation also at TP-MPC about how we use fully homomorphic encryption to facilitate fun applications on the blockchain, more specifically general purpose, privacy preserving smart contracts. And back then we gave some talk about the key aspects of the protocols and why it was important in the blockchain setting and how you basically build the whole infrastructure. But we didn't go into any details in the actual protocol or the underlying MPC. It was more of a high-level overview of how to actually do something in practice using MPC. So this is basically what we're trying to do a bit here in this talk. Although I know it's late in the afternoon, it won't be particularly theoretic. It's more you should view it a bit more as a talk of these are the issues and fun challenges you get when you actually want to do things in practice. You have some other constraints than you're used to in the academic setting. Okay, so basically we're in the setting where we have a fully homomorphic encryption scheme, and we have a private key for this, and we want to protect it, right? Like we need to make sure it's secure in some way. So the first question, maybe not here in this audience, but in general, at least when we talk with industry, is like, why not use secure hardware, right? We have HSMs, we have Ts, which you can use to protect any kind of private material or even compute on it, it's like this problem has been solved. Of course, here in MPC, I know all of us kind of probably strongly disagrees with this because MPC is quite different. And basically, there's a lot of reasons for why you want to actually use MPC and not just secure hardware. Secure hardware is not bad. Secure hardware is great for specific purposes. Like HSMs are great in banking sectors where you just want like old standardized crypto, when you don't need to run custom code, when you have a bottomless pit of money to buy modules which are quite slow. But it doesn't really work for more advanced things that you want to run fast. Then there's T's, which is like what Intel, Apple, ARM, and so on has been doing, of making partially secure enclaves on existing hardware, which are great. They run fast. They have a lot of RAM. You can run custom code, easy peasy. Unfortunately, a lot of these have issues with attacks. Basically, SGX, as most of you might have heard, has been broken numerous times. So they're not that great in protecting against a malicious owner. They're great at protecting against a hacker or someone who just passes by. So much the same reason why you wouldn't just use the eagles to send the ring to Mordor. It's easy to corrupt if it passes by. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to take our precious item, like the private key, and instead keep it safe using a group of individuals, a fellowship, if you will. But at some point, we might find out one of these people in our fellowship is actually not that trustworthy. Another one might just disappear for a while and not really be online when we need them. But despite these things, we actually want the whole fellowship to complete the mission and protect the material. So with this metaphor, we actually come up with a few things that we need for a MPC protocol to work in this setting. We need it to not just be two-party, three-party. We generally want it to be a lot of people, or a certain amount, since we're going to have different collaborators to take care of this. They might change size and so on. We need something that has some flexibility. We need something that's also robust with guaranteed output delivery, right? If you're running something, in particular in a blockchain setting, you need to have uptime. You can't just have things go down because one internet cable in some country gets cut. So you need to have robustness as well. Of course, we also need to handle malicious parties. I mean, this is the real world. Parties do end up being malicious sometime. And one more thing, which is a bit more subtle, is actually the fact that we kind of want asynchronous protocols. Why do we want this? Well, because synchronicity is nice and fun and good when we write papers. It makes everything so much simpler. But in practice, especially when you have a lot of parties, in different jurisdictions, you have a lot of latency, and things get much more tricky to work efficiently when you're using synchronous protocols. Okay, so based on that, let's have a look at what we would actually do. So if we consider FAG like an LWE-based scheme, if we consider key generation, it looks pretty straightforward, right? Like it's basically just a zero encryption where you have a secret vector, some noise added. You don't even need any multiplications. Of course, things get a bit more complicated because with FAG you also need a bootstrapping key, and you do need some multiplications. So now we're in the setting where we need a full-fledged MPC protocol with guaranteed output delivery that works in an asynchronous setting. Another small issue is that we need this secret vector to be a bit vector. We also have an error distribution we need to get into this. So besides this, so there's a couple of small things to overcome, which I'll return to a bit later in the talk. Similarly, when we look for decryption, we have the same situation. It's kind of simple, right? Linear function, basically you have the S, easy peasy, and then you round. You decrypt using S, evaluate the linear function, and you round things. Well, not exactly, because if you do this, the noise of E will leak information from the shares of S, so you have a problem with that. So then you need to do something else in decryption. Basically, the approach we use is noise flooding, where you basically add some more noise, which is so big that the information theoretically drowns the initial noise. You might think this is a problem, but it actually turns out to work quite well, at least in practice in our situation. But then again, you still need to generate this extra noise. How do we do that? Okay, so now we are in the situation where, you know, we don't just simply take any MPC protocol. There's a bunch of ifs and buts and so on. In particular, in our setting at Sama, we use MPC not over a field, but over a Galois ring. Why? Because we use TFHE, which works over 2 to the power of something, 2 to the power of something rings. So if you've been messing a bit with these things, you know this has the issue that you don't always have inverses, which makes things complicated when you try to do certain operations. So in this situation, we don't just use Shamir secret sharing naively. Fortunately, Shamir secret sharing, which is usually defined over field, can easily be extended to Galois rings without too much trouble. The main thing is you need what is called an exceptional sequence, which means that any sequence of values in this ring or any difference between them must be invertible in Shamir in order to do Lagrange interpolation. This is not the case if you just do as normal 1, 2, 3, 4, because 2 is not invertible when you work modulo, say, 2 to the 128. Fortunately, you can easily extend this by basically just throwing in polynomials, so you have things over a polynomial. It makes things a bit bigger, but it's not too bad. Basically, the degree of the polynomial becomes proportional to the logarithm of the amount of parties, because you're basically, if you consider the integers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, you just do the binary encoding in the coefficient instead of having the actual number. But yeah, this basically means the Shamir kind of works out. No big issue, a bit of overhead, but not something we can't handle. All right, so then asynchronicity and guaranteed output delivery. Well, again, with the Shamir secret sharing, it's basically an application of Reed-Solomon codes. And because we have guaranteed output delivery, it means we need to be able to do error correction. These error correction algorithms also normally work over a field, so not a big issue. Well, it turns out when you then start looking into the bounds of threshold you can use, normally you would be able to use a threshold n over 3. But when you start looking into the asynchronicity, you end up with basically a kind of a different bound where you need n over 4, at least if you just follow the straightforward approach. There's fortunately a way to handle this, which was invented in the 90s, and it's not even that slow. It's basically just think a little more about it. Like whenever you have enough shares that you could possibly do reconstruction, then just check all of the points and see if they're on the polynomial that you end up getting with the reconstruction. So by doing this in an iterative manner, you can still get the proper bound of t less than n over 3. All right, so concrete efficiency. Well, so far I just talked about Shamir. Of course, Shamir in itself is not a full MPC protocol, so we need to figure out how we actually go from there and then to do the rest of the steps. So we basically do take the first tool in the toolbox, which is beaver triples. They work great in the online phase, asynchronous, robust online, no problem. We can still keep the threshold we had, t less than n over 3. So basically what's left is just to define the offline phase. And then again, as we talked about earlier, the noise that we need for the noise drowning and the decryption and the noise in the public keys and how to do bits. Okay, but one step at a time, right? So when the binomial coefficient of n choose t is small, then we can do something very efficient. We can basically use an approach called pseudo-random secret sharing, which is kind of like a version of replicated secret sharing. Basically, in this situation, each possible pair of parties agree on a random PRF key. Then they can use this locally without interaction to just generate secret shares of random values. It turns out you can use this to also get 0 shares, and then you can apply the Damgon-Nielsen 07 protocol in order to get the proper sharings you're used to, in order to get beaver triples, as we've seen already earlier today, where it was applied. So far so good. So this means we can pretty straightforward get quite efficient multiplication. So that's great. It also turns out that this approach based on pseudorandom secret sharing has another advantage, which is that we can use it to generate the noise for noise drowning. Because we're kind of like in a flexible setting with the noise, we just need enough noise to drown, but we still have enough space for extra noise that it's okay if it's not completely follow a specific distribution. So we have some flexibility, so we can also do that quite efficiently as well. Okay, so far so good. Now the last funny bits that we talked about. So as mentioned, we need bits. We need bits in order to define the secret key. When the modulus Q is an odd prime, then this is straightforward old technique, basically based on doing square roots, like computing a square, then taking the square root, and then the distribution of the root is whether it's the biggest or the smallest is evenly distributed. This, unfortunately, since we don't have two inverses, doesn't work in our case, so we need to do something else. Fortunately, Nigel and some other people back in the 90s found out you can do this using traces, so you can get kind of like the same situation as before. Like, I won't dive into the details of the protocol, but it's kind of almost the same. You end up squaring things, and you end up with a value and a polynomial for where you need to basically solve this. But you can do this in the plane, and then basically adjust back into with a random pad to actually end up getting a bit. So it is doable, and it doesn't actually cost more than in the Q prime case. There's also the case where Q is not a prime. I won't really dive into this. This is a little bit more complex, but still doable. But basically, the key is that even though you work over a Galois ring instead of a field, you can still have bits, which is great, without costing too much. So that's very nice. Okay, so the noise distributions. If we were to not use TFHE and instead use BTV or BFV, then it would be straightforward using New Hope distribution. Unfortunately, this won't quite work in our case, because the noise we need is quite a bit bigger, so it ends up becoming too slow. So we could instead use Gaussian-like distributions, but these are again like quite expensive to generate. But it turns out we can basically use an almost uniform distribution, and the math still adds up without having like a big deterioration in the security or anything like that. So again, basically the situation reduces to being able to sample random bits, which we fortunately already found out we could do. And then everything is good, and everyone is happy, and we have a protocol, and everything is great. There's no more buts. Well, small one. How efficient is this? Because, I mean, Rama is a startup company. We are trying to make products. We are trying to actually deploy things globally with a bunch of different partners. So, yeah, we need to consider the efficiency. So let's first start with the happy result, more happier results like land-based decryption, which we can do quite fast. I have here some benchmarks that we did recently of different domain sizes. So just a little parentheses, we use TF-HERS because it allows us to do computation over Galois rings, so 2 to the power of something, which makes a lot of sense because that's what computers usually work with, right? This is what developers are used to, this is what computers are used to. So this makes everything in relation to the user experience much better. So here are these numbers. Like basically we can do We can do decryptions up to 128 bits in less than a second, whether it's 4 parties, whether it's 10 parties. Latency, as I will show in a second, doesn't matter too much in this protocol. One interesting fact with this, it's run on a pretty heavy machine, which is also why you can see that there's only a jump in efficiency after 32 bits, because less than that we have enough cores to, it's because after that we end up having not having 3 cores left, basically. What is interesting with these numbers is, and this noise drowning is, basically 80% of the time here is not based on MPC. It's basically based on having to run a bootstrapping to take TFHE ciphertext modulo 2 to the 64 and push it into a TFHE ciphertext modulo 2 to the 128. Because this is needed to do noise drowning, otherwise we end up having too much noise. So the fun thing about this is that very, very little of this is actually MPC time. Half a second is about simply doing this bootstrapping, which is the heavy stuff. As we can see here on the WAN setting, which is based on 4 or 10 different servers in Europe and North America, so with quite high latency all the way from the West Coast to mainland Europe. We still end up being below a second, which is also quite nice, which again shows it's not a lot of rounds, there's just a lot of computation. Okay, I made a typo on the slide, sorry about that. When it comes to key generation, the story is not as nice. Basically, there's a lot of stuff to do in FHE. The issue is not generating the private key, which is just some bits. That's easy, not a big issue. The issue is the bootstrapping keys. The bootstrapping keys are big, and they're quite expensive to generate. So this ends up being in the order of hours. Not too crazy, like less than a day, but you know, definitely not instant. This is, of course, not the nicest thing, but it's not a deal breaker, right? Because if you consider, like, you're not gonna generate an FHE key every day, right? You're considering a situation where you use one key to collaborate a lot of people in order to do secure computation. So this means you basically only want to change this or generate a new one whenever you change the set of MPC parties, maybe, or at regular intervals, such as NIST recommends in order to refresh a key, so like every year or something like this. So while it might seem bad, you know, we would argue that it's not really a big issue. We can see the WAN times, not a big difference either. A little bit more, but again, not too bad. So yeah, I think it's all kind of manageable. And that's basically it for today. Thank you for your time. Let me know if you have any questions.
Questions, anyone?
Hello. Hi, nice talk. If I heard you correctly, that if there is no bootstrapping, it's significantly simpler, right?
Yeah.
And significantly faster. So do you have any number in mind, like minutes, hours, like without bootstrapping?
Without bootstrapping, it should be minutes, I think. Like because I mean, you just basically need the bits and the noise, and like for the private keys. So I don't know exactly, but it should be very very lightweight. But we kind of need the bootstrapping, otherwise we can't do computation.
For FHE, yeah. I mean, I'm just considering like a level case, or let's say.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Cases. But for torus, probably it doesn't make sense because you need to bootstrap pretty often. But for other level cases, I guess there might.
Yeah. You I think in that situation, if you use another not TFHE scheme, like right. then you could get by much faster with this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
We have another question there.
Thanks for the nice talk. So you were mentioning that you can do pre-processing and online phase for key generation. I wanted to know whether if you change parties, you can reuse this pre-processing with the new people, or what would be the scenario where you decide to like do part of the computation ahead of time and then generate keys?
That's an excellent question. Generally, we follow this because this is the general paradigm, but conceptually speaking, it doesn't make sense to have a pre-processing phase when there's no private input, right? Like the whole thing is a pre-processing. You could just say you could pre-process keys and just have them ready in a pipeline for whenever you need one. So in that situation, it doesn't make much sense. Like the only but in relation to this is the parameters. If you want to continuously generate keys for different parameters, you could have a pile of bootstrapped triples that are ready to use. The way we do it now, to have simplified the implementation, is we generate exactly the amount of bits we need for the specific parameters of the key. But yeah, of course, you could ideally have a service that keeps running all the time in background, and then you can generate faster once you know which specific parameters. But in most settings, you would always know the parameters you would want to use for the keys. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, then we can thank the speaker for such a nice talk and great analogies with respect to Lord of the Rings. Yeah.
You have to give you have to give credit to Nigel. Yeah.
They were pretty cool. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for making the first day a success. So we would like to inform that everyone who has been provided on-campus accommodation, we will be providing a vehicle for all of you. You just have to like go downstairs and like find someone wearing this shirt, or maybe tomorrow we won't be wearing this shirt, so keep an eye for this red lanyards, okay? You can grab someone and ask, hey, where is my vehicle? And other thing is like, if you have any suggestions or anything, you can write to us in the helpline. Like you can send message or emails. Like we know today we messed up some stuff, like the Wi-Fi was not working properly and everything. So we hope it could be better. Once again, thanks everyone. And tomorrow